Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Hours after two NYPD officers were ambushed and shot dead in their squad car, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio condemned anti-police violence as reprehensible.
When a police officer is murdered, it tears at the foundation of our society.
But on the way to the podium, de Blasio was met with a brief show of resistance from the officers he was about to support. Video from the New York Post shows NYPD cops turning their back on the mayor as he passed by them in the hallway. It's a small symbol of the backlash that's broken out against de Blasio after Saturday's shooting, which has thrown the already tense relationship between the mayor's office and the NYPD into turmoil. Officers Wenjian Liu and Rafael Ramos were fatally shot while sitting in their squad car in Brooklyn. Police say the suspect previously posted angry social media rants, some of which centered around the killings of Michael Brown and Eric Garner by police.
What we're seeing from this right now is anger against the government. There's others who talks of anger at the police. He specifically mentions Michael Brown and Eric Garner.
Now many New Yorkers are voicing anger at the mayor for partially supporting the protests, ranging from police unions.
There's blood on many hands tonight on the steps of City Hall in the office of the mayor.
To former police commissioners.
Quite frankly, the mayor ran an anti-police campaign last year when he ran for mayor.
To ex-mayor Rudy Giuliani.
It's not the time to say there's blood on his hands. It is the right time to talk about his policies, however. His policies of allowing protests to get out of control.
Most of the acrimony stems from de Blasio's refusal to crack down on the protests, condemning the NYPD for the choking death of Eric Garner. The progressive mayor has been trying to walk a fine line, expressing sympathy for the protesters while still supporting the police. But tensions between de Blasio and the police force existed even before the mayor took office. In his campaign, de Blasio promised to end the controversial stop and frisk police tactic, which had many defenders among the NYPD. The mayor's office has also scrapped with the police unions over labor contracts in the past, more so than with the city's workforce unions. The NYPD is still investigating the double homicide. A police spokesman says the NYPD is combing through the suspect's social media accounts and has recovered 5 videos and 10 eyewitnesses from the scene. For Newsy, I'm Zach Toombs.
Welcome. My guest for this final episode of the 2014 season is retired NYPD Lieutenant Rob Schwach. Mr. Schwach entered the New York City Police Academy in July of 1989 after spending many nights as a member of the Bayswater Security Patrol, a volunteer crime watch organization in his Far Rockaway neighborhood. He candidly admits that he saw many good cops as a member of the Bayswater group, and many lazy cops too. He felt he could do a better job than many of the officers he encountered, and was inspired by a number of respected officers in the organization to take the civil service exam to join the department. After graduating in the top 2% of his class at the police academy in the late 1989, he was assigned to a field training unit in Queens, working mostly in Flushing and Jamaica. After completing the field training, he was assigned to the 100th Precinct in Rockaway Beach. Finding what he described as a home in their community policing unit, he started many programs to combat youth violence, truancy, car theft, and graffiti. As a result, he was presented with the Beat Cop of the Year award in 1993. He was promoted to sergeant in 1994 and worked as a patrol supervisor and training coordinator on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. In 1996, he was transferred to Northern Queens to run a new unit. In 1997, while planning for President Bill Clinton's visit to Shea Stadium to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's breaking the color barrier in baseball, his work caught the attention of Chief of Department Lou Anemone, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD. After the safe and successful presidential visit, for which he received an award from the Secret Service, he was assigned to the chief's staff. In December of 2001, partially because of his work in the aftermath of 9/11, he was promoted to special assignment status. His work in the Disorder Control Unit, rewriting and training protocols for protests and riots, was rewarded with a new assignment in 1998, preparing for terrorism. He and the members of his unit played a pivotal role in creating the NYPD COBRA program, which trained officers to don protective equipment to respond to incidents of chemical, biological, or radiological attack. He was promoted to lieutenant in 2004 and continued his terrorism response assignment by supervising teams of officers deployed throughout New York City. After 21 years of service, he retired from the NYPD in late 2010. Currently, he works for a member of the New York City Council. He accepted the position in order to maintain his lifelong role as a civil servant. Despite his many accomplishments, he spends most of his time earning his most important rank, Dad, as a father of three. For the sake of full disclosure, it should be noted that I first met my guest while working as a reporter and associate editor for The Wave of Long Island, where his father, Howard Schwach, served as managing editor. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the show, Mr. Schwach.
It's great to be with you, Gary.
I'm going to begin with a news report that was showcased in the opening segment. As it indicated, the tension between the mayor's office and police unions developed after union representatives stated Mayor Bill de Blasio, and this is an exact quote, threw police officers under the bus after expressing concerns about what his son, who was half black, might have to deal with during an encounter with police. I'd like you to respond first as a father of three, and secondly as an NYPD veteran, to what Mayor de Blasio stated during the press conference.
I think the response would actually be the same on both levels. You respect the mayor's comments, and he's certainly entitled to his opinion. And as a father, his concern for both of his kids has been evident throughout the campaign and the administration. I think very often police officers, because it's so important within their organization to, quote, back each other up, unquote, and not just literally but figuratively, they also like to feel that they have the backing of the people that they work for. I think we all would, regardless of our occupation. And from the Tale of Two Cities campaign that kind of divided people to begin with, through the lack of a contract and a number of other situations where I think the police really felt that the mayor was not backing them. And then maybe it was as much our inference as it was his implication in that mention with Dante, that he had to sit down and kind of explain to Dante, and I'm putting words in his mouth, which isn't fair, but something to the effect of, they're here to protect you, but you have to be careful of police also, and this is why. And certainly the implications, or our inferences, were it was because he would be treated differently because of his color. And while that certainly goes on, it'd be absurd to think that out of 35,000 police officers in this city and hundreds of thousands across the country, that racism doesn't play in to certain encounters. To make it seem so widespread and criticize the police, I think gave them the perception that he didn't have their back. And then, we can go into the getting involved with Reverend Al Sharpton, who has had a contentious history with the police department and with government. A series of things that I think have just led to a level of frustration that boiled over because of the emotions of the officers being killed recently.
Shortly after the officers were killed in Brooklyn, Patrolmen's Benevolent Association President Patrick Lynch made comments that many prominent leaders within the black community, in and outside of New York City, denounced as dangerous and divisive. Moreover, many felt Lynch's declaration of war was grossly inappropriate and made an already tense situation much worse. Now, I realize you may not want to respond to the PBA president's comments, so I'll simply ask you this. Given your expertise in police community relations and the level of tension that was prevalent in the city, do you believe the situation should have been handled differently?
I think whenever you take someone speaking in public, whether it's the mayor's comments, Patty Lynch's comments, or mine here, you have to take them into context. Patty Lynch has been president of the PBA for a better part of a generation. He has a strong following. He's got an election coming up, and he's got to show he's incredibly strong in defending his members at a time where they're literally, Gary, being gunned down. So I think if you took them in a different context, you could see them as being inflammatory. But given that his job, his responsibility is to defend the police officers of the city of New York, I think this would be him at his strongest. So taken in that context, I don't think that his comments were that out of line. I would like, in a better world, if we could all tone down the rhetoric on every side and come together and work together to make sure things like that don't happen. But taken in the context where he's about to bury a fallen officer and 35,000 plus members of the department in the rank of police officer and above are looking to him for leadership, it's not surprising that he said what he did.
Given the statement regarding the declaration of war?
I know, hearing it sounds extreme, absolutely. But I think, again, you have to take it in the context that it's given. 2 weeks ago, it would have been a line with what's going on here, sensing the level of frustration of his members. Remember that, union presidents, we like them to represent, all of us in a sense of what's best. We'd like the UFT, the teachers union, to represent the interests of kids in schools. They don't. They represent their membership that pay them. That's their job, and I don't think we should expect anything different from Patty Lynch. I would have, I'm not a PBA president. I think I might have chosen different words, but it's easy to say when I'm not in his shoes at probably the most difficult time during his administration.
Solidarity has been and always will be paramount for members of the New York City Police Department. However, your successful track record of police community relations programs is a clear indication that you were willing to step outside of your comfort zone, take the initiative, and develop different approaches to policing while uniting communities you served. That said, would you have turned your back on Mayor Bill de Blasio when he visited Woodhull Hospital after officers Lou and Ramos were shot?
That's a tough one. I was at the funeral yesterday when the officers turned their back. I wasn't in uniform, having retired, but I turned my back as well. And so I think it'd be hypocritical of me to say I wouldn't have done it had I been there at Woodhull Hospital. Again, I spoke to a lot of friends, people through social media that don't understand it. And one of the things that I think causes the friction between the police and community is this bunker mentality sometimes that cops get, that, we are the police and nobody understands us and people don't get it. So I don't like to go down that path. But it's a very difficult time for cops in general, for NYPD members especially, with what's going on the last few months. And I'm sure we'll get into it with Ferguson, with the Eric Garner case, a number of other things that have happened that are life-threatening contract issues that I think the police officers have just kind of had it with their perception of a lack of support for the administration by actions and by things that the mayor has done. So, I can understand the people that feel that it's disrespectful. I get it. And it was intentionally disrespectful. Police officers don't have the same ability that most members of our society do to vent their frustration. You're not going to see cops in uniform out there screaming at the mayor, although you've seen other employees in the city protesting against the mayor, yelling and screaming on television. You're not going to see cops do that. It's not how it works. You're not going to see police officers going on television, current television, or on your show, because they're not allowed to speak as members of the department. I have that luxury because I'm retired. I don't have those restrictions. Although people may perceive it as disrespectful, this may be the one tool that the officers have left to show the mayor and the city that they're very unhappy with how his administration has handled their job.
Let me follow up with this then.
Sure.
They turned their backs at the funeral. If they were there to show respect and pay respect to Officer Ramos, do you think that they should have taken into account, yourself included, should it have been taken into account the fact that this man was, I believe, hours away from becoming a chaplain? And when you consider that, a chaplain is a man of God. A man of God is about peace, is about unity, is about love. That said, I don't think that Officer Ramos would have wanted his brethren to perform that act at his funeral. Would it be fair to say that?
Since neither one of us know him, I guess it wouldn't be unfair, but I don't know him. I know that there are a lot of officers I know who turn their back who are also people that go in peace, that are also very religious, that believe very deeply and spiritually in peace and in God, who also turn their back. So I certainly wouldn't wish to speak for Officer Ramos. The thousands of members of the department who did that, just as a reminder that it didn't happen in the church, it didn't happen in front of the family, it happened outside as a little statement to the cameras that the mayor would see later. And I can't say that Officer Ramos, being a member of the department for a few years as well as a member of school safety, might not have been one of the ones who had done that if the positions were different. So it's difficult to say, but it's not unfair to say as a man of peace, he probably would have been looking to bring us together rather than further divide us.
Many of the protests and protesters in New York City have been labeled anti-police. But in my conversations with members of Eric Garner's family, they indicated that they and fellow protesters are not anti-police, they're anti-bad cops, and there's a big difference. Do you believe an anti-police sentiment has engulfed the city?
I think it has, and with due respect to members of the Garner family, I saw your interview. I thought it was fantastic. And, regardless of how you feel about the case, I don't even say there are sides to it. Everybody should look at that video and feel horrible that that individual was suffering. And you wish that we could all go back, hindsight being 20/20, and have done something different to prevent the outcome that occurred. Even if you're a staunch defender of the police and the tactics were appropriate and you had what coming, whatever side you're on, nobody likes the outcome of that. And it's very difficult with what they must be dealing with. You go back to the beginning when you're talking about, as a father dealing with the boss's comments about Dante. I'm looking at this guy and I'm looking at his kids, and it's just terrible that something like that happens. I don't know. It's a very tough question because there's so much emotion involved. I think a lot of the feeling of anti-police sentiment in the city is brought on much more by perception and rhetoric. I think, and it's true of a lot of situations in the country now where we're polarized, whether by race or you tend to hear demonstrators screaming at the top of their lungs and then people screaming back at the top of their lungs. The majority of Americans are somewhere in the middle and can empathize with both sides. And even though they may take a position, it's not a disrespectful one. But that's not what makes good television. You know, the people calmly saying, well, you know, this is my feeling, but I agree with the other side. I see what they have to say. We don't get that on television. Nobody wants to watch that. And then people coming out the other side and saying, you know, the police are always right and they can do no wrong. We are the police. You hear these both sides, these both extremes, and it seems like there's no middle ground. And because the police don't defend themselves, again, cops on duty are not allowed to speak to the press. Cops off duty, current officers are not allowed to speak to the press. We don't defend ourselves very well. You hear, you know, the voice of the department coming through the police commissioner or his spokesperson, and that's it. But you hear tens of thousands of people who are unhappy, yelling, screaming. It gives the perception that what should be anti-bad cop sentiment becomes anti-police sentiment.
The killings of Eric Garner and Akai Gurley have forced citizens and the national media to revisit the fragile relationship between the NYPD and minority communities. But another development has shed light on the fact that the problem may not be limited to residents in communities of color. On December 23rd of this year, Reuters, one of the most respected news agencies in this country and abroad, reported the following. Off-duty, black cops in New York feel threat from fellow police. Reuters interviewed 25 African-American male officers on the NYPD, 15 of whom are retired and 10 of whom are still serving. All but one said that when off-duty and out of uniform, they had been racial profiling, which refers to using race or ethnicity as grounds for suspecting someone of having committed a crime. The officers said this included being pulled over for no reason, having their heads slammed against their cars, getting guns brandished in their faces, being thrown into prison vans, and experiencing stop and frisk while shopping. The majority of the officers said they had been pulled over multiple times while driving, and 5 had guns pulled on them. Desmond Blaze, who retired 2 years ago as a sergeant in the 41st Precinct in the Bronx, said he once got stopped while taking a jog through Brooklyn's upmarket Prospect Park. I had my ID on me, so it didn't escalate, said Blaze, who has sued the department alleging he was racially harassed on the job. But what's suspicious about a jogger in jogging clothes? The NYPD and the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, the police officers union, declined requests for comment. During your 21 years of service, did black or Hispanic officers ever express concern of this nature to you or your supervisors? And if so, how was it handled?
You know, I was very fortunate not to have to deal with a lot of that. I mean, I had heard stories and I had witnessed growing up in Far Rockaway issues with police officers treating people differently because of race and off-duty. I don't remember talking to cops a lot about things that had happened to them off-duty because of their race after they got on the job. Before the job, we shared stories because I witnessed it as a kid in Far Rockaway as well. And I guess the first thing that kicks in is you want to defend your organization, but it would be hard to in the face of those facts. I wish that those officers would be coming out publicly so those types of things would be investigated. Clearly, as a white guy driving around, I wouldn't be subjected to that, so I wouldn't even know how to put myself in their shoes to say that they're right, they're wrong, it happens, it doesn't happen. Because clearly, if they're accurate, it wouldn't happen to me. So I don't know. I mean, I've been stopped and pulled over since I've retired. You know, nothing to do with a gun pulled in my face. So it would be hard for me to really appreciate what they're going through. I'd like to think, though, if these are happening, they know that there are many ways legitimately through the department that these types of things can be investigated. And if you have officers that are constantly coming up on the radar as having done this, they go through a program of being monitored much closer by the supervisors and retraining to prevent their recurrence. So I would hope, if the report is accurate, I have no reason to believe it isn't, that these officers are taking those steps. So if there are people out there that are policing by color and not policing fairly, that these things are investigated so we can identify those officers.
I'm glad you mentioned that point regarding the investigations because it's a great segue into my next question. Residents of the black community have told me the biggest issue that they feel is impacting the relationship between the NYPD and communities of color is trust. Several angrily pointed to the fact that officers are rarely convicted or punished for abusing or killing unarmed black teens and men, which is a major sticking point for many. Based on some research I've done into the background of Officer Daniel Pantaleo, their claims regarding the trust factor appear to be valid. On December 15th of this year, the freethoughtproject.com, a US-based watchdog group, outlined Pantaleo's legal problems in an article, a portion of which stated, Officer Daniel Pantaleo, the man who was responsible for Garner's death, has been sued 3 times for violating the constitutional rights of other black males in the area by performing humiliating strip searches and fondling their genitalia of his victims, some of them in public view. The most recent of these lawsuits was filed in November and comes from Kenneth Collins, who said in the lawsuit that he was, and this is a quote, was subjected to degrading search of his private parts and genitalia by the defendants. The NYPD paid out a settlement last year to 2 men who sued the city because Pantaleo forced them to strip naked in public as he touched and searched their genital areas or stood by while this was done in their presence. According to another lawsuit, victim Raylon Walker was charged with marijuana possession and underwent similar rights violations by Pantaleo. The charges were dismissed against Walker and the case sealed in a motion from prosecutors. His lawsuit against the NYPD stated that Walker, and this is a quote, was committing no crime at the time and was not acting in a suspicious manner. Defense lawyer Michael Callahan summed up this atrocity when he wrote a letter in August 2014 to U.S. District Judge Edgardo Ramos. In his letter, Callahan said, to put it mildly, many police on Staten Island have been playing fast, loose, and violently with the public they seem to have forgotten they are sworn to protect, wrote Callahan. After litigating about 200 of these civil rights matters in the eastern and southern districts of New York since 1977, I have seen no interest by the management of the New York City Police Department or anyone employed by the City of New York in doing anything to stop this. If the emphasis and focus is, and has always been, to build a relationship of mutual respect and trust between the NYPD and minority communities, why is Officer Daniel Pantaleo still employed with the New York City Police Department?
Well, if you take the facts the way that you presented them, it would be hard for anybody to respond in any way other than agreeing with you. But we all come to where we are in life based on our experiences and things that we've gone through. And clearly, there's a bias that comes with being a police officer. Some of this is going to sound like I'm defending him or the department. I never met him. As you know from our discussions over many years, I have no problem criticizing the department or people I work with or admitting to my own mistakes when I think it's appropriate. Let me start by saying active police officers, and when we use the word active, an active cop to other cops means somebody who makes a lot of arrests. Somebody that's bringing in people with guns, somebody's bringing in people with drugs, that's out there looking to stop people who are committing crimes and bring them in and lock them up to get them off the street to make things safe. So if you make a lot of arrests, you're very often going to wind up being sued. Some of them are legitimate. I don't know the situations you discussed other than having read them in the newspaper. But it's not out of line for an officer who makes a lot of arrests to be sued, whether they're legitimate or not. I'll give you just a personal example. Part of my tenure with the police department was training officers to handle mass arrests at protests. And because I had done some teaching in the past and writing, I wound up writing the lesson plans for officers who were making arrests en masse at a demonstration, at a protest. Because my name is on that lesson plan, I am often sued and called into court, even though I wasn't at the scene of the arrest and I don't know the officer affecting an arrest, just because my name is affiliated with that particular procedure. I've never had a civilian complaint. 21 years in the police department hasn't stopped me from being sued. I think another important thing to remember about what you're saying is the lawyer is entitled to his opinion, but the fact that he makes money, he puts bread on the table, feeds his family by suing cops, you have to understand which side of this he's on. He's not going to come out and say, most cops are doing a great job, but I got to go after this guy. So I just feel a little bit careful. I think if you looked at some balancing numbers, but, an active officer may make 50, 60, 70 arrests. It's not uncommon in the course of those arrests to get civilian complaints or to be sued for false arrest. It'd be interested in finding out how many arrests he'd need based on that, which doesn't defend him if he was wrong in that case. But I think it has to be taken in context. It's tough. Again, there are programs within the department for officers, especially with brutality issues or discourtesy issues. If they pop up as being under investigation or multiple complaints, they go through a program called force monitoring, where they're retrained and they are heavily supervised. So there are ways of dealing with officers who they suspect are not handling the job properly. And it would be interesting for me just to to be fair on this particular account of this officer as to how many arrests he made, whether he was active, and this is part of the cost of doing business in a sense, because you get sued whether you do something or not, we know that, and whether it's part of some type of monitoring program. The New York City Police Department didn't settle that lawsuit. The law department of the city of New York did. And again, take it in context, like many entities, a lot of times you choose to settle for a lot less money than take a risk of going to a jury and proving your case. So I would not equate that settlement with this officer was guilty of what he was accused of. May have been suing for millions of dollars. You get back to that attorney's motive. And I don't know him, so I don't want to cast aspersions to him individually. But the officers that sue the police department, they work on a contingency basis. They get a third of every settlement. So the more cases they throw at the city, the more settlements they get, right or wrong, the more money they put on the table. So I would just like to see that story taken into context. How many times this guy sued the city, how much money he's made, how many times he's gone to court and proven his case against police officers. And then we can come to a better conclusion with all the information in front of us.
In terms of New York City Police Department policy and protocol, what would you cite as a key reason for the dramatic shift in the relationship between police and communities of color?
I don't think it's any one factor. In almost every case that I've been privy to or seen where there's a conflict between police and the community, the perception is almost always much more extreme than the reality. I'll give you some background on it in preparation for the interview, because it's come up a lot with friends and relatives and asking questions. You see newscasts of protests lately, the police officers have been accused or charged with the death of an individual, and you have people saying, they're shooting our kids in the street. They're shooting them like dogs, and you can't go out on your street at night, and the police are out to get us. In most cases, the perception of what happens is much worse than the reality. Most people, if they were given that question, they would go towards the policy of stop and frisk. And I think, again, the perception is very different from the reality. Stop, question, and frisk, and it's stop and question, not stop and frisk, is based on English common law. It's a tool in the police officer's toolbox that's given to him or her by the Supreme Court. It's across the country. This isn't an NYPD miraculous policy. It isn't something that we come up with that nobody else does. The idea goes back to the fact that police officers have, a right to be safe, just like any other individual. And if a police officer can articulate that he or she was in a dangerous neighborhood or stopping somebody they believe to be dangerous, stop and question them as to their actions, and they feel that their life may be threatened and there may be a weapon, to do a quick frisk of the individual for their own safety. It's not a stop and frisk, it's not a stop and search. But I think because of what the perception is, if you listen to the media, this is an NYPD tactic that's only used in New York, and it's only used against people of color. And that just, really isn't the case. We can discuss whether it was overused or if it was applied fairly. I think those are legitimate decisions. But again, the way the question was tailored, what one thing you think is dividing us, I think most people choose stop, question, and frisk. And I think it's a good example of where the perception of what happens is very different than the reality.
If you had an opportunity to attend a City Hall summit with Mayor Bill de Blasio, NYPD Commissioner William Bratton, PBA President Patrick Lynch, and respected leaders and clergy members from minority communities, what suggestions would you make to try and quell the level of dissension and tension that's become commonplace?
There's no easy, cheap answer. There was lots of people would have suggested it prior to this interview. If I had to pick one thing and make the case, and I did as a cop, it was a program I started in Rockaway that was very successful. It doesn't have to be this program because it's fine, but something similar. I started a program in the schools called Project Hope, and you may remember it from your days out here as a journalist in Rockaway. COPE stood for Community Outreach by Police Through Education. What I would do is go into some of the local schools as a cop in Rockaway and ask for a period a week in school, junior high schools generally, where I could talk to kids. Because I've always said that, nobody calls 911 to invite me to their birthday party. If they're calling 911, it's because their life has gone so horribly out of control that they can't handle the situation, whether they're a victim or they're a perceived victim, or they've been in a horrible accident and they need the police come and help. So I think in a lot of places, you only see the police as being around when there's a problem. And I know a lot of kids, I've talked to them on my beat and having kids of my own, when do they run into the police? They run in when you're pulling mommy over because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. You're grabbing daddy because, you got a little bit too much to drink one night. You're showing up to tell us that somebody in your family's died and making a notification. These are all very bad things that are happening in your life, and I think the connotation is, cops are only around when there's real trouble. So the answer to this program was to go into the schools and give the kids an opportunity to see cops as people. And it blossomed into getting other cops in the precinct involved to help deal with some of the low-level problems in the neighborhood. We would go out and do graffiti cleanups. We would go out and leave notes on cars if you found them unlocked. People, keep your cars locked, otherwise somebody may take the things out of it. It was a way of empowering the kids to do something positive, but also showing the kids that the police were doing positive things in the community also. So it worked very well, really, to change the perceptions in this limited area around the school. I'll give you one story that kind of emphasizes it. I had a particularly difficult kid, just give his first name was Jason, who lived in a housing development, single mother, had a boyfriend living with her. The father had been abusive and left the house. The boyfriend was abusive. Jason was an only child, hated his living conditions, was probably being abused occasionally too, although he wouldn't admit to it. Constantly chewed from school and a problem. When I started Project Hope, he was one of our target kids we wanted to help. Teachers that identified him as a decent kid who was just going through a lot. He was cutting out of school, doing graffiti. So the program would encompass what we called good kids as well as at-risk kids, so that the at-risk kids, had some type of role models of their own to follow. Jason and I spent a lot of time together doing projects. He really helped to turn things around. And then one night, unrelated to Jason initially, I was working a night shift and I saw somebody breaking into a car. By the time I got up to him in uniform, he ran. I got on my radio, called for assistance, gave chase, just like you see in the TV and the movies, and I'm yelling for him to stop. He runs up towards the beach, goes under the boardwalk. Now the scene changes for me as a cop because I can't see him. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he had a gun. I don't know if he didn't. I'm waiting for backup to come. I have my flashlight. I'm looking around, and a call comes over the radio that a police officer needs help immediately at the location that I was at. It turns out later on we apprehended the guy under the boardwalk. I wasn't in any danger, but the caller said that I was. When we got back to the station house for processing the arrest, I got on the computer to look up the call. And the callback number came to Jason's apartment. Jason was sitting upstairs at his housing project, and he saw me chasing this guy. And even though I wasn't in any danger, he actually called 911 and said, "You got to get Officer Schwach help. He needs help right away. He's chasing a bad guy." This is probably a kid who would never have given the cops the time of day before that program started. But because he felt, he had a relationship with the police, there were good cops that he saw that he could trust, he actually got on the phone and called 911 to try and help me. And this is not a cheap program, because it means taking cops off patrol and putting them occasionally in schools. It means training cops to make sure that they're, sticking with whatever the program's curriculum is. And it comes off as kind of a pie-in-the-sky, very liberal, or a themed program, because it's about helping people, and cops are supposed to be out there locking up bad guys. But I would make the case that it's an incredible investment in the future of not only our kids who may be going in the wrong direction to give them some guidance, but in terms of police-community relations. And there are cops all over the city that do that. I'm giving you my experiences. There are cops that are doing these types of things, working with kids, but it needs to be on a larger scale basis, so we're reaching a lot more people, and we're reaching their parents as well.
Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing, sir?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak because, two reasons. Number one, it's clear that the city in general and the country in particular have become somewhat polarized based on relationships with the police, and not just the communities of color, but across the country. And I think it's important that police officers get to speak and show ourselves as people. And again, that the on-duty guys, the guys that are working and gals, don't have the opportunity. They're not allowed to speak to the media. The other reason is I have hope. I've seen a lot of positive examples and a lot of negative examples of cops. I think I can see the difference very clearly. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to get away from that rhetoric that we're hearing at the extremes of these issues. People aren't being gunned down in the streets, and things aren't quite as bad as some people would have us believe. But I think the police also need to admit that, the attitude, we are the police, and the ends justify the means, and we have to defend ourselves. Therefore, we can, do almost anything. I think is an incorrect mentality to have also. And I wish there were more people in the middle who, regardless of what side they're on, they're closer to the middle, can sit down and have these discussions and come up with ideas and work together to prevent it. And it's not going to happen when you have people at the extremes. Union presidents have to be a PBA president who has to be at the extreme defending his membership. And, some, we both know who we're talking about. I'll just say somebody like Reverend Sharpton, who I think starts out with good intentions but goes too far in the other direction of rhetoric. I would have liked to have seen a statement or attendance by him at the funeral of the officer yesterday. I think just coming, not even speaking, he doesn't have to get on camera, although I know that's what he likes to do, just as a message that, you know, if we don't have the bad cops, then we have to respect the good ones. We have to pay respect to a department who's in mourning. And that didn't happen. And it would be nice if we could move everybody a little closer to the middle, because I think that's where the best decisions are made.
Well, you are aware that the Reverend Al Sharpton did call a press conference with members of the Garner family, and they denounced the killing.
I am, but there's a difference to me. You know, the answer to most problems in the world, Gary, is not to call a press conference. You call a press conference because you want people to see you on television and only listen to your opinion. So I don't see that as reaching out. But I greatly appreciate the members of the Garner family who have in most cases, I'm not privy to everything they've ever said, but I heard his daughter, I've heard the family on your program. I think after what they've gone through, to come back in and try and be as fair as they can and reasonable is a credit to them. And again, I really wish, and I think we all do, that the outcome of that case was very, very different, and they wouldn't be put in the position to have to attend these press conferences.
You know, it took a great deal of courage for you to appear on this show, and I'm extremely grateful that we had an opportunity to discuss these crucially important issues. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
As I bring this episode to a close, I hope officials within Mayor de Blasio's administration and the PBA leadership will follow our lead, come together, and be willing to ask and answer hard questions in order to begin the process of healing New York City and making it safer, stronger, and more unified for everyone. I'm the G-Man, and I wish you and your loved ones a very happy New Year. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.